Hello, my name is Chris Campbell, and we welcome you to this edition of One on One. Our special guest today is Margaret Hall of the Southfield Domestic Violence Group. Welcome to the show, Margaret.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you taking the time to have me.
Absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. You're in the midst of planning the second annual Southfield Domestic Violence Walk. Kind of give us some of the 411 and the backstory about what it will involve this year.
So the date we have for our second annual walk is October 3rd, which is a Sunday. It'll be in the morning, and you'll be able to um, come as you are pretty much. There's no special dress for this, but we're hoping for good weather. Last year we walked in the rain and the cold, but we still had two walks with over 200 people, and it was quite effective. So this year we're shooting for October 3rd in the morning, and we're hoping that everybody can come.
Nice. Now, tell us a little bit about recapping the first walk, because we know that you basically conceptualized this to address a pressing need in the community. Tell us how it came together for the first walk and moving forward.
So when Chief Elvin Barron became the Southfield Police Chief, he had a press conference back in the winter. And this was just prior to COVID, actually. And one of the pressing issues that he had on his agenda for right-siding Southfield was to address the rising domestic violence calls. And so he put together a high response team as a result of that. The high response team, after meeting, decided that we wanted more awareness and prevention to take place. But what better way to do that with it getting community involvement, with just getting out and walking and letting people hear our voices about it.
Yes. Now, domestic violence, this is something that affects and afflicts many communities, not just Southfield. Give us an idea of just how much of a affliction it is.
Well, 1 in 3 women is basically, I won't say attacked, but has to deal with domestic violence or some sort of sexual assault in the United States on a regular basis. Our numbers there, 1 in 3, have grown over the years. It used to one time be 1 in 4. Prior to that, it was 1 in 7, 1 in 8. But over time, it is now 1 in 3. So if it's you and 4 people, one of the 3 of you would sometime maybe have an opportunity to be involved in a situation like that. And those are not good statistics.
Yes. Now, some may have a misconception that domestic violence only impacts certain communities or persuasions, culturally or of color. How wide-ranging is domestic violence?
Domestic violence can happen to anybody, like you catching a cold. It doesn't set out for any particular gender or race or faith-based initiative or social economics. And I always ask the question, what does it look like? It could look like anybody, anytime, anywhere. It impacts that many people. You could be a college professor. You could be a doctor, a lawyer. I've had clients who have been both, male and female. You could be Black, you could be white, you could be Asian, you can be from the Middle East. I've had experience with all of those ethnicities. And the one thing they all have in common is that domestic violence isn't something you wake up and say, I want to happen to me one morning.
Yes. Now, in relation to the walk, you had the first walk last year. Just sort of recap and walk us through what are some things that you were able to accomplish with that first walk?
So one of the things we're able to accomplish with that walk is community awareness, and to the people to understand that we're here working to make this go away. Domestic violence can be eradicated. It's not something we want to have around. It's something we want to go. So last year was a time for us to come together. Even with COVID, we had a lot of people who came out on a rainy, cold day, and we basically walked in the rain. And we had people who didn't matter to them. They were happy that we did this. And basically we said, fine, let's do this every year. And with the cooperation of the city of Southfield and Chief Elvin Barron and the high response team and a committee that's worked hard, we're doing this again this year.
Now, Chief Barron has been a very key figure and a very important and significant factor in this domestic violence walk. Talk about how important he's been to this.
This is at the top of his list. And when I met Chief Barron, I didn't know him prior to becoming a police chief here. I've worked with the last 3 police chiefs here for Southfield. And I just called him one day, talked to his secretary, Shandera, said I wanted to come by and introduce myself. And I did. And he said, we need to talk more because that is something that I really want to get involved with in Southfield. So that's how our conversation started. And then we planned together with a committee with Judge Sheila Johnson, the chief judge over in Southfield. And then we put together some other members in the community. The mayor is involved. We have some of the people who are on the city council involved. The Martin Luther King Walk Committee, they heard about this and says, let's do this. This is something that we want Southfield to look like, because Southfield pretty much is a city that people look at and recognize as being a place for people to be able to live.
Now, the domestic violence walk takes place in October, but domestic violence is not just a problem in October. This is a year-wide problem. So explain how this walk could be key in raising awareness for this problem all year round.
You're right. Domestic violence doesn't just happen in October. When you're in domestic violence, the whole 12 months, you don't look for it to happen in October. You don't look at it to happen in any particular month. It's 24/7, 365. That's some people's life. The awareness and prevention piece is that when we want people to really take action and do something about it. So the numbers go down, the statistics disappear, and that there's not such a threat, as well as an economic hardship on many communities that this entails. Our healthcare system spends a lot of money because of domestic violence abuse. And instead of just, saying, oh, I want this to go away, no, you got to spend more money for awareness and prevention. Because we've been in a pandemic lately, domestic violence has become the shadow pandemic. It's a pandemic within a pandemic because people are already isolated away from people they care about. And because of the pandemic, they're at home more, where you have people who are not getting along already. So you have a perfect chemistry for a perfect storm that could end in disaster. You've got children at home, not at school. You got people who are not working. So instead of somebody being able to go out and get help, there's nowhere to go. We've had to close shelters. We've had people, not be able to go to work anymore, maybe cool off from a situation, come back and take a different perspective. But with the organizations, being at I would say a deficit for funding, because that's also happened, it has been impacted for us from a pandemic point of view, because people still call you for help and you try to help them so that somebody doesn't lose their life.
Yes. Now, in relation to the Southfield Domestic Violence Group, kind of give us a brief history of the organization. When did it start? What groups make up the organization?
So in 2006, I started Southfield Domestic Violence Group. One day I was sitting at home. I was just coming fresh out of a divorce. I am a survivor of domestic violence. And what was happening to me was horrific things that people had never seen before. And I said, you know what? I don't want this to happen to anybody else. My marriage was from the outside, it looked perfect, but it wasn't. And it started to fall apart, and I recognized the signs. So I immediately started to go get help. But I didn't get the help I thought I was going to get, because they said, first of all, the household made too much money. I was educated. I wasn't somebody who didn't have a job. And I said, okay, fine. So how many other women are in this same situation? Financially, domestic violence could really wipe somebody out, especially if you're a female who is married, had a household, and had income. The minute that income goes away, then you're listed what? As a low-income person. If you got children, you're impacted that way, where you now have to be the sole breadwinner. And then how do you do that? If you have a job and basically you're in a domestic violence relationship, sometimes domestic violence is so bad physically, you can't work, even emotionally. Financially, it could be devastating. Many people file bankruptcy, or they find that their bank accounts get empty and they have no money. And when you try to go get help, sometimes the help isn't there the way you need it, and your lifestyle changes overnight as a result of it.
Yes. Now, you mentioned something earlier about the COVID-19 pandemic and how that has contributed in a rise and a spike in domestic violence cases. Why is that so, and how can that be prevented?
Well, the pandemic hit everybody by surprise. So figure you have a person who already is in an abusive relationship, and they're already alienated from their families. They're already not able to leave. They're afraid. And fear is one of the biggest factors of why people don't leave. People think it's easy to leave. It's not easy to leave, especially when, where are you going? You don't know anything else. How are you going to leave when you're not sure where you're going? So when the pandemic hit, people were just stuck. Everything was shut down. You couldn't go to a shelter because the shelters ended up closing, many of them. We had the social distance. We didn't have vaccines at the time. So that was a huge, huge situation. So where are you going to go when you're going to feel safe? The hospitals had everybody in them. So if you did get injured in this domestic violence situation and you had to call, for medical care, you possibly may have been able to be seen or not if you called 911, because guess what? The hospital rooms were full. So where were you going to go? And they were trying to help people with immediate injuries. So for many people, and I got a lot of calls about it, they had nowhere to go. They were depressed, suicidal, didn't want to really think that one day I'm going to be okay with this. So when somebody calls your house in the middle of the night during a pandemic, they have nowhere to go. They have no money. They can't go to work. Everything was shut down last year. I mean, just everything. And it was a dark, dark time for many people in those situations. So during the pandemic, the rates did spike, especially with intimate partner violence, where there were people who were together intimately, where nobody was leaving. You couldn't leave. If you remember this time last year, we didn't have a vaccine. We were just stuck, hoping for something to happen, hoping that someone would create something, but we were months away from that happening. So there goes the look of hope and despair in many people's lives. So what does that look like to them when they're already in an abusive situation? It's like you feel hopeless. So when people feel hopeless, what do? And they're already afraid. So yes, the pandemic within the pandemic, definitely for domestic violence.
Now, let's touch back on your motivations in starting the Southfield Domestic Violence Group. As you are a survivor, how has it been therapeutic for you to watch this group take off and to watch those walks take off as well?
If you had told me years ago that I would be doing something like this, I would have told you absolutely not. I don't think anybody gets married and has a relationship, or any relationship and not marriage, and want to end up in an abusive situation. So when things start to fall apart and things don't look idyllic anymore to you, and you feel like your whole world is crashing down to you, what do? Well, you could do nothing or you could do something. And I'm just can-do type of person. So I said, I want to do something so that what happened to me doesn't happen to anybody else. So I formulated this group. I started as a support group. I started meeting with women, and I started it on Meetup. Meetup was the place that people were, picking places to go and meet about different topics. There wasn't one for domestic violence, so I started one. And we had a support group, and we started meeting. That was in 2006. We used to meet right in Borders in Birmingham. And then when the group started getting larger, we moved to Royal Oak. And then we're still meeting in Royal Oak. We were meeting once a week, and people were coming, on a Monday night after 6 o'clock and just talking about what they needed to do, not knowing who they were going to meet when they got there. So as my group started to grow, I had already formed a nonprofit, and then I had board members, and I had people, and I had contributors and people who wanted to help this situation because there wasn't one around. And I could see where this was going to grow and get bigger, so I had to put some things in place. So by putting things in place, I had to become that person outside who would get sponsors to do certain things. And that's what I did. I started getting community sponsors like Walmart, the Guest Store, Uggs, Walmart, just the stores, and then Myers and Kroger's. And people just started, saying we want to do more, we want to help more. So I had to get a team of people to help me volunteer to get things to people who really needed them. We've had people even be able to get cars as a result of my outside community work and establishing community partners with, say, somebody who needs to get their car fixed but can't afford it. So when you have a status like this, and then you have people who need all these things, you actually become like a catalog of resources. And that is basically what my organization is. We're a catalog of resources.
Yes. Now, we know that there are a lot of moving parts when it comes to planning an event this large. Give us an idea of what it's like planning a domestic violence walk.
So think about doing the Olympics, but on a smaller scale, because number one, we only have one day to do this, but it takes a lot of days to put this together. So when you have great partnerships with people and no one said no. When they heard we were doing this, our committee grew from like 8 people. Now we have 39. And we've had great sponsors from people. 411, does a lot of the PT services here in Southfield. They were a phenomenal sponsor last year. They're going to do it again this year. We had Suburban Liquor come in and help us. We've had people who had food trucks come in and want to feed the people after the walks. And we've also had people who say, you know what, I want to do more. So we have people who say, I want to volunteer that day. I want to hand out literature. I want to be a part of the security team. I want to be a part of handing out flyers, sharing on social media. It's a big deal. All the way from the design that's on my shirt, which was custom done last year. We're doing it again this year. We're going to have a couple of people there who are going to talk about their survival of this. And we're also going to have more information about how you can get involved.
I want to talk a little bit about one organization that you've been partnering with for this event, and that is the Southfield Roadmasters. Talk about how important that has been, and how did that collaboration come to be?
So the Southfield Roadmasters Vet Club, I want to say this much. I met through Chief Elvin Barron, and our partnership has just been, I think, a godsend for me. They are one group that are out there that are not just driving around in beautiful cars. They actually are community activists. They're involved with community, helping, doing many things around the community. So I asked them, to partner with me, and they didn't hesitate. They've been at probably every function that I've had, from the walk we did last year to the toys we handed out last year in Southfield. We just did some a book bag giveaway at the Southfield A&T this past week. And they're going to be big supporters of our next walk. Last year, they were our protection as we were walking in the street, with their cars, making sure everybody got safely to the walk and back to the city. So they've been really great and phenomenal. I couldn't ask for a better group. They never say no. They're always ready, and they're always wanting to do more.
Yes. Now, talk a little bit about this year's walk in terms of what do you hope attendees take away from it? What's one major takeaway that you want attendees to walk or glean from that event?
The awareness and prevention factor. If we had more people involved in domestic violence and the prevention of it, we wouldn't have it. And it doesn't start when you get older. We're finding that our populations right now are becoming younger. It's happening in schools. It's happening in different grade sectors. Not necessarily in preschool, but maybe by the time they get K through 5, middle school, kids start to establish relationships, and they mirror what they see in their homes. And if there is a disturbance there or abusive relationships there, we see that in other ways of actions for kids when they do come out to schools. So we want them to understand that it can happen anywhere to anybody at any age. We want people to understand that this is something that we're not going to let grow in Southfield or any other place. We want to be the template for how to get rid of it.
Yes. Now, in terms of just volunteering, for those that are interested in volunteering for the walk, what's the process and protocol to do so?
So if they want to volunteer, they can go on the Facebook page for Walk to Awareness Southfield 2021, and they can register there on that page.
Okay, yes. Now, for people that are dealing with domestic violence, what are some steps or what are some encouraging things that you can say to them to reach out to organizations like yourself for help?
So my organization, yes, we're one. Haven is another. They're probably the largest in Michigan. They're also in Oakland County, but Haven does a lot of work around the communities. They are one place where you can get help. You can also go on the Haven website. You can call. There are phone numbers available there. In addition to that, you can also talk to the National Association Against Domestic Violence, which is also on a website where they have 24-hour service as well for people. If you ever need help, they're there as well. So there are places for people to go. There's always somebody ready to do something. The one thing we want people to do is to talk about it. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't try to solve it yourself. Understand that there are people waiting to help you figure it out. Because when you're in it, sometimes you can't think about how to get out of it. You're just trying to survive day to day. And for many survivors, that's all they're able to do. But there is help available.
Yes. Now, in terms of just talking about domestic violence as a whole, um, for those that are dealing with it, you have dealt with it. How does this group serve as like a support group for domestic violence survivors?
So we are a resource group. So we basically try to deal with whatever they need at that point, whether it be housing, transportation, employment, maybe even an escape because you don't know where you're going to go. And I've had to do that many times. We've helped people escape in the middle of the night, miles away, while we plan this. And sometimes most people don't understand it. One of the things you can do when you're in a domestic violence situation, you don't see your way out, is put a plan in place for your escape. We also tell people when you put the plan in place for your escape, make sure that you don't share that plan, that you keep it to yourself. The smaller you keep it, the better you keep it, but you do want resources to help you get out. The other thing we want people to do is to talk about it and to tell somebody. There's so many times when you hear about domestic violence, the next thing you see the yellow caution tape at the place, and it's because nobody knew. The neighbors didn't know, the families didn't know, and there's so many questions afterwards, and sometimes that person doesn't make it out with their life, and there's a question mark as to how does this happen, and we didn't know. You can't be quiet about it. You have to talk about it. You have to share, and you have to basically understand this. If you don't talk about it, we're not going to be able to help you, and you know you can't help yourself, so we're here to help you.
Yes. Now, are there any signs or identifying markers of domestic violence that sort of rears its head before it actually happens that people can sort of identify?
Absolutely. So controlling behaviors, number one. Someone always having to know where you are, number two. Having to know, your phone, how to get in your phone. Sometimes domestic violence turns into stalking. Sometimes stalking becomes domestic violence. You really don't know. Relationships are the number one factor where people can find out who is this person in my life. So what we recommend to people who may be in domestic violence situation is look for certain key points. Are you isolated, away from family and friends? Do you always have to answer the phone? Do they have to know where you are every day? Are you able to do anything by yourself, or do they always have to be there? So that comes the control piece. Domestic violence is about power and control. It is not about anything else other than that. The more powerful that person gets, the more control they have. And once they start to lose the control is when it becomes the most dangerous part in your life, coming out of domestic violence.
So, getting back to this year's walk, for those that are thinking about coming but haven't decided whether they would participate, what words of encouragement would you have to say to them?
I would have to say to you that if we don't do something about this, domestic violence is going to get worse. I don't recommend that people avoid this. You may not be comfortable, but at least be informed. You may not have all the answers, but at least be able to help somebody. Maybe you can do it anonymously. Maybe you can do it as a contribution, because there are many organizations who use domestic violence funds to help somebody. Sometimes it's just a night away from where they're experiencing all the disaster. Sometimes it's just them having a little peace of mind. And sometimes just that could give somebody some hope. And hope is what we basically try to give people, to tell them, you're not going to continue to live your life like this. Hope is right there for you. Fear basically is the thing that keeps people from hoping. And hoping is what we try to give people when they contact us.
Yes, very well said. Now, for those that want to keep track of your activities, whether it involves the walk or any other related activities happening with the Southfield Domestic Violence Group throughout the year, where can they go on social media to keep track of what you're doing?
They can always try our meetup page, which is confidential. You can't just join. You have to go through a vetting process. You can also go to our Southfield Domestic Violence Group.org website. Our contact information is on there, and you're able to follow us there as well.
All right. Well, Margaret Hall, thank you so much for this conversation. Very much needed, very informative, and hopefully it's a conversation that will help many in the community who may be experiencing domestic violence. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. This show will be broadcast on Southfield Cable Channel 15, but it could also be viewed on demand at Southfield Multimedia Services on both YouTube and Facebook. For Southfield Multimedia Services, my name is Chris Campbell. We'll see you next time.